Think your lashes have hit their limit? Discover limitless length and full volume with Maybelline Sky High Mascara. The Flex Tower brush bends to volumize and extend every single lash from root to tip. And the lightweight bamboo-infused formula makes lashes feel weightless. Now in 8 bold shades so you can take your lashes to new heights every day. Visit Maybelline.com to shop Sky High Mascara now.
Welcome back to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. I am entertainment writer Jim Hill, and Mr. Taylor, whose writings on the industry you can regularly read over on The Wrap, and whose music to the Mission Impossible movies you can still listen to on Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. Now, Drew and I are recording this week's show on Saturday, December 13th, a little earlier than usual for us. Drew's in his home in Toluca Lake, whereas for this week's show, I'm down in New Jersey, holed up in a hotel for reasons I'll discuss later in today's show. Anyway, Drew, I gotta ask, this has to have been an absolutely crazy week for someone like yourself who works as a professional entertainment reporter, because, I mean, first and foremost, all of the holiday films are coming to market. In fact, you have to run out and do some Anaconda-related stuff later today.
I do. I'm going to the premiere of Anaconda tonight, so very excited about that. Okay. Me and a buddy are going. Katie opted out, which is, that is in her purview as the most supportive wife.
There we go.
But it's actually, Jim, you'll appreciate this. It's at the United Theater downtown, an old classic movie palace. So I'm very excited. I've never been there before. I'm really excited. So yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, okay. But yes, the amount of work that I already had to do before the industry started to eat itself, starting with its foot, is yeah.
Now, speaking of which, again, other thing worth noting is that we're in the middle of award season, and I always like to check in as to what you emceed lately. What panels are coming up? Anything we need to be aware of? Or
well, it was so funny because you asked me that last week, and then I immediately was whisked away and had to do a Avatar Q&A down the street. But on Monday, this will be too late because it'll be the day after, but I'm doing something for the Elephant, which we've talked about on the show before.
Oh, so cool.
With my buddy Penn and Rebecca and Ian will all be there on the Warner Brothers lot on Monday. So I'm excited to do that. That's like when I'm looking forward to moderating Q&As as kind of a getaway from the chaos of work, that it's weird, and it's a weird time in the industry. So,
no. And speaking of a weird time in the industry, relatively tiny matter, very barely worth mentioning, that 2 giant media conglomerates, Netflix and Paramount Skydance, are getting ready to do battle over Warner Brothers Discovery. And want to point out, on last week's show, as we were talking about Netflix's initial offer for Warner Brothers Discovery, you were already talking about how Paramount was getting ready to mount a hostile takeover bid. And by Monday, a day after we recorded, sure enough, what is it? That Paramount Skydance had ponied up a $108 billion offer to counter Netflix $82.7 billion offer. And of course, over the past week, what we've learned that makes this especially interesting is that Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, is in the mix here, which gets a little dicey because the government, eventually is going to have to weigh in on this acquisition due to
also some Saudi money, Jim. I'm sure some perfectly legitimate Saudi money in there too. They'll actually own more of the company than the Ellisons will if the actual.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's going to happen, but if the bid is accepted by the shareholders.
Yeah.
Do we need to talk about what a hostile takeover bid is for people?
Do we?
Well,
okay.
Briefly, I think it's him trying to appeal directly to the shareholders more so than the CEO. So he's actually, I don't know if you saw some of the things he was sending to the Warner Brothers shareholders in all caps. It was very kind of petulant child not getting the toy he wants at Toys R Us. Yeah.
Okay, and that was honestly enough for this week. But then we got the Disney AI news, and this for those of you who weren't paying attention, Disney signed a 3-year licensing and investment agreement with OpenAI, and what's interesting about this is that part of this deal is it's going to allow users to generate, short AI-powered videos and images featuring, 200 Disney characters. And when we say Disney characters, that's Pixar, that's Marvel, that's Lucasfilm. What are you hearing about this, Drew?
Everyone is just completely okay with this, Jim. Just universal acceptance across the board. No, I mean, it really feels wrong, and I think a lot of creatives within the company and without the company are really upset about this, and I understand why. And you know what? If I was some kid who was some tech savvy who knew how to use this stuff, I wouldn't be making things for free for a giant company that they could then use on Disney Plus and other platforms.
Yep.
Right? It's just it's insane to me, and I think you and I had heard that Iger and Altman had kind of been commingling earlier in the year, but the fact that it finally happened and on such an insane scale too, I mean, I can only hope that the 3 years kind of comes and goes and nothing comes of it, which is my hope. But the investment in OpenAI of $1 billion from the company is it's really gross. And, they made mention in the press release that this would be utilized in the parks as well as an in-app feature. So some pretty wide-ranging implications. Have you heard of anything that they're going to try to roll out first, or?
Well, what's more interesting is why. In fact, people within the company pointed to the fact back in 2016, Iger had the opportunity to buy Twitter and passed. And forever since then, it's like, we could have had it for a low price point. That could have been ours. But the interesting thing is that supposedly what stopped Iger from going after that was the InfoSeek thing back in 99. Remember, Disney put up $2 billion and launched go.com and that thing crashed and burned within 2 years. So Disney has always been just not good when it comes to tech, or at least, emerging tech. And
as a former employee of Disney Interactive, Jim, I have no idea what you're referring to.
Okay. So that's the interesting part of this, that if you talk with people in the company, they're like, I don't think there's a plan. I mean, I think this is, if you look at it, if you look at the way it's structured, it's just a 3-year commitment. And, the guardrails that are in place for this use of the characters, you can't use the character voices. They're only 30 seconds long. And there is virtually no information about how these things will actually be curated, what the process will be, for approval so that they will, these things can then wind up on Disney Plus. But the other thing that evidently in-house, what drove this decision was that, there's this stat that evidently people keep talking about inside of Disney, that 10% of all media is now consumed over on YouTube in 30-second long videos, and that Disney just wants to be in this market. And the notion of, we'll get kids to do it for free. And then, and with the...
I think that's what Walt used to say, right?
There we go. But at the same time, it's just sort of like, and then let's see what happens. Maybe there'll be this genius kid who has this amazing take on the characters that, and something will rise to the top. I mean, the other thing that kept getting brought up to me is like, remember the ABC Cap Cities deal back in 95, $19 billion. And they didn't even consider when they made the deal ESPN. ESPN was just there in the pile. And then that turns to be the real crown jewel, the real cash generator. And it's just the notion of, okay, let's take a flyer on this for 3 years. But the other thing that kept being told to me, Drew, was like, just remember, Iger's out the door at the end of 2026, and he's setting this in motion. And in theory, right now it's Josh D'Amaro's job to lose, and it's really more about, well, what does Josh do, when he takes up the reins at the company in early 2027? Is he going to be enthusiastic about this?
Well, there were two interesting things that happened around it. Did you notice the same morning that they announced the OpenAI deal, they sued Google AI for infringing on their copyright?
Yeah.
Kind of playing your hand there a little bit.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happened a couple of days later was that Zootopia crossed the $1 billion mark, which is a movie that you and I both know hundreds of people, talented artists, worked on both in Burbank and in Canada.
Yep.
And is such a testament to the kind of imaginative power of Disney, making $1 billion on the same day that Disney gives $1 billion to this ridiculous, deadening technology. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk a bit more about the box office, but that's an important point to make there. And, that said, folks, before we get to the rest of the animation news of this week, got to acknowledge our sponsor here, which is, of course, UnlockMagic.com, where you can get real discounts on Walt Disney World and Universal Orlando tickets, sometimes up to as much as 12% off. And just a reminder, Unlock Magic is run by the exact same folks behind the DVC rental store and the DVC resale market. And if you are planning a trip to Central Florida in 2026, just pick your dates, grab your tickets, and go. Unlock Magic makes it that easy to rack up some pretty significant savings. Oh, and when you get your tickets, tell the nice folks at UnlockMagic.com that it was Drew and Jim that sent you. So... And again, Drew, want to remind folks, we are recording the show on Saturday, December 13th, which is, again, a day earlier than typically Drew and I do this podcast. But even so, the box office projections for this weekend seem pretty consistent across the board, right? That Zootopia is going to be number one at least a North American box office this coming weekend, right? And as you mentioned, this Byron Howard, Jared Bush film, has it officially blown by the $1 billion threshold? Because
only 17 days, Jim. We made $1 billion.
Okay, and that's at the worldwide box office, folks. And just want to remind you, earlier this year, the live action version of Lilo and Stitch also did that. Also want to remind folks, though, that Ni Za 2, that made in China animated feature, did the same thing, and it sits currently as $1.9 billion. And also just want to remind folks, Walt Disney Animation Studios has had $5 billion earners over the past 12 years. There's, of course, the original Frozen from 2013, the original Zootopia from 2016. Then we got Frozen 2 in 2019, Moana 2 just last year, 2024, and now Zootopia 2. And I have to ask, Drew, if you're hearing the same thing that I'm hearing when I talk with folks at Disney Feature Animation, because face it, coming off of Strange World in 2022 and then Wish in 2023 to now have $2 billion earners back to back, that's got to feel good, right?
It does, and it certainly turns up the heat on Hexed next year, which is going to be very interesting because it's going to be the first original animated feature since Wish. So yeah, we'll see how that does. I'm just really excited about where Disney animation is right now, and
Same thing here. And
then these big paydays for the stars have frozen. I'm still waiting for my lunch with Josh Gad. We're gonna pick a really nice place. Jim, if you see a paparazzi photo of us at Spago, you know.
There we go.
What happened?
There we go.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
All right. By the way, another billion-dollar earner for Disney was, of course, its photorealistic version of The Lion King, directed by Jon Favreau back in 2019. That actually made $1.6 billion worldwide, $543 million stateside, an additional $1.1 billion overseas, and of course, this is the film where Seth Rogen voiced Pumbaa the Warthog, and as Drew will tell you, we got to talk with Ernie Sarbella back in August of 2017, and then asked him about how he felt about this, how Rogen was voicing Pumbaa in the live action thing, and Sarbella said he was letting him borrow the characters. That do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember that. Yes.
You could borrow it, and I bring this up because did you see that trailer for Andy Serkis's Animal Farm? And more to the point, this film screened at Annecy back in June.
Oh, I saw it.
Okay.
People didn't believe me when I told them what this movie was like, and now they saw the trailer, and now they know.
Yeah. And I want to point out here that the thing that's really unusual about this isn't just the trailer, it's who's now distributing this film. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, this is being distributed by Angel Studios, the right-wing Christian organization. And what's really interesting is that I actually learned a lot about Angel Studios last year because I did a story about them, and they have this process where if you're a member of the Angel Guild, which is hundreds of people, Jim, from across the country, you can actually vote on what movies Angel puts out.
Oh. And
sometimes you will fail the initial process and have to resubmit to the Angel Guild so I really wonder if the movie I saw last June is even the same movie that's coming out in May.
Wow.
Or if there is some tweak that had to happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because face it, the trailer suggests significant departures from the original Orwell novel. It just, between the, Napoleon in his race, his sports car spinning around the farm,
yes.
yard.
It's a little bit like if Illumination made a George Orwell movie.
Well, all right, but all right.
It's got a great voice cast, Jim, and obviously Andy is a super talented guy, but
he's a master at these sorts of things. And it's important to, I want to be clear here. We're not knocking Circus or the production team on Animal Kingdom for updating the material, for changing the material. Because face it, Disney did that all the time. In fact, just recently a friend was pointing out that Disney Sleeping Beauty, all right, the French fairy tale that movie was based on, from the 1300s, by the way. Disney opted to step over some of the more interesting aspects of the original version of the story, like how when the princess was asleep, she supposedly gave birth to twins. That moment never made it into a Disney film. And by the way, I bring up Sleeping Beauty on today's show because when young Tony Benedict was discharged from the U.S. Marines back in the 1950s. All this guy wanted to do was work for Disney Studios. So he loads up his car, he drives out to California, where almost through just sheer force of personality, Drew, he gets a job as an in-betweener on Sleeping Beauty. And I have to ask, did you ever get a chance to sit down with Tony Benedict? Because he again, he worked in animation for decades.
No, I never did. Was he one of the guys that they kind of trot out every time there's an anniversary of,
Well, what was
whatever.
Interesting about Tony is he joked that he went out to Hollywood and he was a Marine. So, he did a tour at every studio. So, for example, when he was working, at Disney on Sleeping Beauty, he talked about, it's a 70 millimeter film. And he said, when they were working on it, it was like making a stained glass window. The film was so stylized and, it just, it moved so slowly and so much effort was put into it. But then, of course, Sleeping Beauty gets released to theaters in January 59 and underperforms. And Benedict is one of, nearly 500 people who gets a pink slip. I mean, Disney never likes to talk about that layoff when, feature animate, they were 60 people, artists and animators left in the building, after the bloodletting when Sleeping Beauty didn't make its numbers. But Benedict was a smart guy. So when he was at Disney, and every so often there'd be sort of this call to the staff that, hey, we got a thing we're doing for the Disney TV show. Does anybody want to go over and work on that? And Tony would raise his hand and say, absolutely. And, he'd step away from the Sleeping Beauty unit and he would then, he says, look, I learned on the job how to do television animation because it was a faster schedule. It was a different animation style, than what we were doing for Sleeping Beauty. And so, that's why, to hear Tony talk, that's how he got his next job. He wound up over at Hanna-Barbera, working on the Flintstones and Jetsons. And then, interestingly enough, in between there, he's over at UPA, working on like Mr. Magoo. So, but anyway, very sweet guy, an amazing storyteller, seemed to work on everything, every major animation project of the 50s and the 60s. And sadly, we lost him, last month, November 29th, to be exact, at the age of 89. And Drew and I just wanted to take a moment to express our sincerest condolences to Tony's friends and family. He's a guy who'll definitely be missed, and if only for the stories, which were always great. But speaking of things, I'm going to ask. This is a bad transition, but I'm wondering, Drew, are you going to miss the Winnie the Pooh thing that's going on at the Chinese Theater on Tuesday? Have you heard about this?
Wait, no. What's going on?
Oh, remember how back in January of 2022, Winnie the Pooh slipped into the public domain? And that's how we got those two Blood and Honey movies and what?
Yes, of course.
All right, 23 and 24. Well, same window of time, Cartoon Studios announced its plans to launch a new Winnie the Pooh animated series. The title at that point was The 100-Acre Woods Winnie the Pooh. And remember, at the time, they talked about how they were going to make over 200 shorts and holiday specials. But, and again, to bring today's show full circle here, folks, production process was going to involve a new yarn-based AI-assisted animation style. Drew, finally, we're going to get a peek at what's going on here. In fact, it's this Tuesday, the 16th. It's at the TCL Chinese Theater starting at noon. But they're going to show, give, folks who cover animation, and that's you, Drew. You can come and watch an early sneak peek event for an interesting new name for the show. 100-Acre Woods, Winnie and Friends. So, what do you make of that? We went from 100-Acre Woods, Winnie the Pooh to 100-Acre Woods, Winnie and Friends. Did it sound like Disney Legal raised its hands? Or?
Yeah, it sounds like there was a strongly worded letter sent to them.
Okay.
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I have no interest in AI-generated stuff, but the real Winnie the Pooh project that we really missed out on was the Cartoon Saloon Winnie the Pooh project that was in development for Disney TV animation. That there are clips of online, Jim, and if you've never seen them, they are the absolute most beautiful animation tests in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it is so frustrating to see the might have beens, the test that was done and, shown to executives. It's like, nah, I find sometimes I see the stuff like that and it's like, do I really want to have my heart broken again? But right. Anyway, folks, okay, so I guess that's a no on Drew's part about going to the...
this time of year, Jim, I try to keep close to home, especially if it's AI yarn-based Winnie the Pooh knockoff material.
All right. Well, all right. Now, speaking of Drew sticking close to home, this pretty much wraps Drew's contribution to this week's show again, and that's my fault, folks. I got the news section of this show done, not the feature, which I'm going to record later this afternoon after Mr. Taylor is off doing Anaconda-related things.
Correct.
But Drew will be back for next week's show. And we'll be there for the full ride. But for now, just want to thank Drew for getting up very early on a Saturday to do this and more to the point,
of course,
sharing his insights about, what's going on with Paramount and Warner Brothers and, Netflix and Disney and, this OpenAI thing. So, just an interesting time. And like always, I've been enjoying what you've been doing over on the Wrap this week. So, but
trying, it's very hard to keep up with the actual normal things that I have to be doing when the entire industry is breaking down and rebuilding itself in real time.
That is.
Thank you for having me, Jim. I'll be back next week. And I'll talk to you then.
Okay, cool. All right. And hang in there, folks. When we get back from this break, we'll continue our look at animated Journeys to Oz. But first, this.
When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite, obey your thirst.
The Who's Down in Who Newville were making their list, but some didn't know Walmart has the best brands for their gifts.
What about toys? Do they have brands kids have been wanting all year?
Yep, Barbie, Tony's, and Lego. Gifts that will make them all cheer.
Do you mean they have all the brands I adore?
They have Nintendo, Nespresso, Apple, and more.
What about...
So the Who answered questions from friends till they were blue. Each one listened and shouted, from Walmart? Who knew? Shop gifts from top brands for everyone on your list in the Walmart app.
Jason, Disney asked me to do this podcast thing. I need some advice.
You've got to have banger guests.
Walker and Leah.
Daniel Deemer.
Tim Simons.
Adam Copeland.
You're the one asking the questions.
How?
Why?
And they better answer.
I don't know anything.
Epic.
This season is just makeup.
Quest. I'm Arian Samhadri. Welcome to the Percy Jackson and the Olympians official podcast. Available wherever you get your podcasts. And watch season 2 of Percy Jackson streaming now on Disney Plus and Hulu. Learn more at disneyplus.com/what's-on.
And we're back. Okay, so picking up where we left off on last week's show, which is when we were discussing Off to See the Wizard, the anthology series that aired on ABC September of 1967 through February of 68. A few fine-tuning listeners wrote in to ask how Chuck Jones, that animation master that for so long now has been associated with the Looney Tunes, that acclaimed line of animated shorts that Warner Brothers churned out from 1930 through 1969. Well, these people want to know how Chuck Jones wound up over at MGM in the early 1960s doing projects like Off to See the Wizard. And to be blunt, Jones had been at Warner Brothers since 1933, and after 3 decades of working for the same studio, except for a brief foray over at Disney, and by the way, that's an interesting story in and of itself. In fact, just a sec here. July of 1953, Jack L. Warner, the head of Warner Brothers Studio at that time, actually fires all of the artists and animators who work at Termite Terrace at Warner Brothers. Again, that's the division of the company that did the animation. And Jack did this because, well, he thought he had seen the future. In particular, the film that Warner Brothers put out in April of 1953, House of Wax, which was a 3D movie starring Vincent Price. Anyway, House of Wax had done very well at the domestic box office in May and June of 53, so much so that Jack then announced that, to everyone else in the industry, that from here on in, his studio was only going to make 3D movies. And just so you know, there was kind of a precedent for this sort of behavior over at Warner Brothers. Jack's brother, Sam Warner, had done something similar back in October of 1927, which is when Warner Brothers sent the very first sound picture, The Jazz Singer, starring Al Jolson, out into theaters to great acclaim and, more importantly, even better cash flow, which is why Sam Warner announced that his studio would now only make sound pictures going forward, which, as it turns out, in the end, was a very smart business move. So Jack L. Warner's grand pronouncement in May of 53 that his studio would only be making 3D movies from this point forward, that turned out to be surprisingly short-lived. It only lasted till September of that same year, 1953, whereupon Jack, looking at the suddenly slumping box office for all the 3D movies that were now playing in North American theaters, suddenly reversed course and said, forget what I said earlier. Warner Brothers is going to go back to making 2D movies. And anyway, again, over that 4-month period, Jack had shut down Termite Terrace because he figured there was just no way that the artists and animators that labor there for Warner Brothers could ever figure out how to make theatrical shorts in 3D. They could actually, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, Chuck Jones, who in 53 had a 4-year-old daughter, Linda, who liked to eat, did the responsible dad thing. When he was let go by Warner's in May of 53, he walks over to Disney and applies for a job there. And given Chuck's reputation at that point, Walt immediately hires him and then pairs Jones with Ward Kimball. And this is the part of the story that fascinates me. These two are then given an office in the animation building on the Disney lot and are supposedly assigned Maleficent's goons in Sleeping Beauty, with the idea that these two incredibly talented animators, very funny men, would, put their heads together and come up with a really original take on this specific set of characters, which would then make all of the goon scenes in Sleeping Beauty a real highlight of that upcoming Disney animated feature. That didn't happen, though. To hear Chuck Jones tell the story, he and Ward did little or no work on Sleeping Beauty during those 4 months because, well, at the time, Walt was so busy with plans for Disneyland, which would begin construction in July of 1954, that he never had time to meet with Chuck and Ward to sign off on any of the ideas that they had developed for Sleeping Beauty. And long story short, Chuck got tired of waiting to see Walt Disney, which is why when Jack L. Warner announced that he had changed his mind and was now calling all of the animators and artists who'd previously worked out at Termite Terrace to come back to Warner Brothers and start making Looney Tunes again, Jones immediately resigned from Disney Studio and then went back to work for Warner's. But if we now jump ahead to 1962, again, Chuck had been doing this same thing at Warner Brothers for nearly 3 decades at this point and was feeling the need to spread his wings. Executives at MGM learned that Jones was unhappy at Warner's and offered him the opportunity to set up his very own animation studio over there, which Chuck did. The operation was initially called Sib Tower 12 Productions, but eventually became known as MGM Animation and Visual Arts. By the way, this time of year, one of the very first things that Chuck got in the works when he got to MGM, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, that holiday special, which debuted on CBS in December of '66, that actually got underway in '64. This is when Chuck sent a note to Theodore Geisel, a.k.a. Dr. Seuss. The two of them had worked together back during World War II in the Army Air Force's animation department, under the direction of Frank Capra. Yes, that Frank Capra, Mr. It's a Wonderful Life. And, Jones and Geisel had bonded working on those Private Snafu cartoons that were shown to the troops in the field. But anyway, all right, so that's how Chuck Jones winds up working over at MGM. Now to get to the other question I got from fine-tuning listeners this past week about how did Disney get the rights to put the Wizard of Oz characters in the Great Movie Ride at Disney MGM Studios in the late 80s. And that's an easier explanation. Back in 85, Walt Disney Productions signs a licensing deal that for 20 years gave the mouse the rights to use, the MGM name, as well as certain characters that had appeared in select films from the MGM library as part of a theme park that the company was planning on building down in Florida. Now, the theme park, first initially known as Disney MGM Studios, today Disney's Hollywood Studios, that would open on May 1st, 1989, and then wouldn't change its name till January 7th of 2008, actually 16 months ahead of when Disney's licensing deal with MGM was then supposed to expire. But what further muddies the water here, making it even more confusing when it came to who had which rights to what, was when Turner Broadcasting acquired MGM UA, the studio, in March of '86 for $1.5 billion. And then later that same year, Ted Turner turns around and sells the physical MGM studio with all of its sound stages and film processing labs located in Culver City, California, back to Kirk Kerkorian. Only Ted, being the Sharpie that he was, he retained ownership to the MGM Film Library. And want to stress here that's all of the studio's films that hadn't been released to theaters at that point, 1986. And, okay, now it gets even more confusing, folks, because in 1996, Turner Broadcast is then bought by Time Warner, which is why today the MGM Film Library, which obviously includes that studio's live-action version of The Wizard of Oz, the one that was made in '39, today is considered intellectual property of Warner Brothers Discovery rather than MGM IP. Okay, I told you that overly long, complex story because you needed to have all of this exposition to understand why, in September of 1990, and an animated series based on MGM's 1939 live-action version of The Wizard of Oz actually winds up on ABC as part of their Saturday morning lineup. And to be blunt here, Turner Entertainment was looking to make some money off of that $1.5 billion acquisition of the MGM Film Library, which is why they licensed the rights to Deke Entertainment City to produce a Wizard of Oz animated series. Now, only 13 episodes in total were produced, and the meager ratings that this Saturday morning show got didn't necessarily warrant any more episodes being produced. But again, this used the look of the characters from the '39 film, the way they sounded. It was continuing an adventure in that specific world. Now, this isn't to say that that was the only thing. In fact, our animated journey to Oz is going to continue in a moment. And in fact, we're going to talk about how some of MGM's biggest cartoon stars, Tom and Jerry, made not one but two trips to an animated Oz. And more to the point, how Jorge Gutierrez, also, the gentleman behind Maya and the Three, and the Book of Life, made his own stab at traveling over the rainbow. We'll talk about that in a moment, but first, this.
Kraft mac and cheese is the best thing ever. It's even better than pop music. You look just as natural enjoying us at age 13 as you do 55. Kraft mac and cheese. Best thing ever.
Running a business means I wear lots of hats. Luckily, when it's time to put on my hiring hat, I can count on LinkedIn to make it easy. I can post a job for free or pay to promote it and get 3 times more qualified candidates. Imagine finding your next great hire in 24 hours. 86% of small businesses do. With LinkedIn, I can also easily share my job with my network. No other job site lets me do that. Post your free job at linkedin.com/achieve. That's linkedin.com/achieve. Terms and conditions apply.
Here's my 30-second story with Guinness. As soon as my sister and I get home for the holidays, we don't even unpack. We head straight to our pub. The bartender already knows our order, Guinness and fries. We laugh all night, catch up with old friends, and walk home with faces sore from smiling. It's one of my favorite nights of the year. That was my 30-second story with Guinness.
Guinness Draft Stout. Please enjoy responsibly. Imported by Diageo Beer Company, USA, New York, New York.
And we're back. Okay, so a few minutes back, we were talking about how when Time Warner bought Turner Broadcasting in 1996, one of the things that Time Warner got control of was MGM's film library, and included as part of that film library were the rights to that famous set of feuding cartoon characters, Tom and Jerry. Which, by the way, celebrated their 85th anniversary earlier this year. The very first Tom and Jerry cartoon was released by MGM to theaters back in February of 1940. Anyway, if we slip back now to 1996, around the same time, Warner Brothers Animation is looking at all the money that Disney is making with its video premieres, like Aladdin and the King of Thieves, which hit store shelves in August of 1996. Disney wound up selling over 10 million copies of this VHS, which meant that this direct-to-video sequel to Disney's 1992 hit, Aladdin, it generated a $130 million profit for Walt Disney Studios' home entertainment division. And the executives who were running Warner Brothers' home entertainment division at the time were like, hey, we want some of that action. So they were looking over the assets that Time Warner had acquired when it bought Turner Broadcasting, and they came across Tom and Jerry, who, you have to remember, had starred in 160 animated shorts for MGM, and by the way, acquired 7 Academy Awards along the way. And given that Tom and Jerry already had very strong name recognition, the folks in charge of Warner's home entertainment decided that they'd use these characters as a way to launch a direct-to-video series of original feature-length animated titles. With the first of 13 of these films, Tom and Jerry the Magic Ring, hitting store shelves in March of 2002, and did very well. But on today's show, we're going to talk about the 8th film in this series, Tom and Jerry and the Wizard of Oz, which hit store shelves in August 23rd, 2011. Now, what's fascinating about this particular Warner Brothers animation project is this really skillful melding of two MGM IPs. Again, the 39 live-action version of The Wizard of Oz and that same studio's old Tom and Jerry shorts. And I have to give credit to the production team on this. They found a way to stylize the animated versions of Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodsman, the Cowardly Lion, not to mention Glinda, the Wicked Witch, and the Wizard, so that they fit into the world of Tom and Jerry rather than the other way around. And this home premiere sold so well that in June of 2016, Warner Brothers Animation made a second trip over the rainbow. And what's especially interesting about Tom and Jerry Back to Oz is, well, first of all, it's the very first sequel ever produced in this series of home premieres. Not only that, but Tom and Jerry Back to Oz makes use of a song that was cut from the original Wizard of Oz back in 1939, The Jitterbug. And here's a lovely Disney tie for, all you folks out there. But, James Monroe Englehart, the gentleman who played Aladdin on Broadway, actually, created the role there and won a Tony, Best Supporting Actor, that year. James is the one who performs the Jitterbug in Tom and Jerry Back to Oz. And the other thing that it is kind of fascinating about this particular, home premiere is that Tom and Jerry Back to Oz supposedly made use of some material that had been found in the files at MGM Studio. To be specific, a script treatment that had been put together in 1939 prior to The Wizard of Oz's original theatrical release. This was when executives at MGM were exploring the idea of, well, if this is successful, do we want to do a sequel to this live-action musical fantasy? And, and if so, what would it be about? Sadly, the 1939 version of Wizard of Oz actually lost money for MGM. And that was partly because this live-action musical fantasy cost so much to make. Also, it's worth noting that by the time The Wizard of Oz arrived in theaters, World War II was looming in Europe, which meant that many of the overseas territories that MGM would have previously released this film into were now closed off to that studio, which then severely limited their opportunity for international ticket sales. And speaking of Oz movies that lost money, 2013's Legend of Oz, Dorothy's Return, which was done in CG and had an A-list vocal cast. We're talking Dan Aykroyd is the voice of the Scarecrow, Jim Belushi is the voice of the Cowardly Lion, Kelsey Grammer as the voice of the Tin Woodsman, Bernadette Peters is the voice of Glinda, and Leah Michele as the voice of Dorothy. And I'm not going to lie, it's a handsome-looking movie. But Legends of Oz, Dorothy's Return performed so poorly at the domestic box office, again, when it was released in 2013. It only sold $21 million worth of tickets in all of North America, which is not a good thing when your movie costs more than $70 million to make. Its failure at the box office actually caused Summertime Entertainment, the animation studio that made Legends of Oz, Dorothy's Return, to shutter. Anyway, speaking of Oz movies that were made in CG, I have to admit that me personally, I have a soft spot in my heart for 2015's Guardians of Oz, if only because the versions of the classic Oz characters that we see in this film, the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodsman, the Cowardly Lion, and the Flying Monkeys, were originally designed by Jorge Gutierrez, the writer-director of such great animated projects as The Book of Life, Maya and the Three, El Tigre, and Son of Jaguar. Now, it's worth noting that Gutierrez has distanced himself from Guardians of Oz over the past decade, largely because, well, when Jorge was first hired to work on this project, it was supposed to be done as a hand-drawn film, and that's how Gutierrez designed these characters. And when they opted to do it in CG, Jorge wasn't happy. But even so, Guardians of Oz, which, by the way, was called Wicked Flying Monkeys when it was released overseas. It is still worth checking out, if only because it's supposed to be the biggest animated film to ever be made in Mexico. And more to the point, this Oz movie has a genuinely quirky sense of humor that makes it different from a lot of other animated journeys to Oz that are out there. And believe me, folks, this series could go on for weeks yet. We haven't even talked about the wonderful Galaxy of Oz, the animated series that ran on Tokyo TV back in October of 1993 through April of the following year, 93. That one was set in the far-off world of 2060. And set Dorothy's off to see the withered adventure in deep space, where all of this show's characters look vaguely like they belonged in the world of Star Wars, rather than being something that L. Frank Baum would have ever dreamed of. But I think for now, we're going to bring Fine-Tuning's look at all those animated journeys to Oz that are out there to a close. More to the point, I also think that it's time that we bring this week's episode, the one that we only got Drew Taylor up on the front part of it, to a close as well. By the way, if you missed Mr. Taylor's voice in this part of the show, I want to remind you about Light the Fuse, which is the official Mission Impossible podcast that Drew did with Charles Hood. There are nearly 300 episodes in that podcast archive, and each and every one of them is loaded with amazing behind-the-scenes stories about the film industry. Mind you, I hope you can say the same thing when you listen to some of the other podcasts that we post here at Jim Hill Media, that you hear amazing stories, and those shows include Disney Dish with Len Testa, the Epic Universal podcast. That's the one I do with Eric Hersey, the talented gentleman who produces a lot of the shows here at the network. Likewise, I want that too. The Disney Merch podcast that I do with Eric's lovely bride, Lauren. Also wanted to remind you of Manufacturing the Magic. That's the themed entertainment history podcast that we host here. That's actually produced by Noah and Shelley Valladolid. There'll be a new episode of that series posting here on JHM this coming Saturday. Tail end of this month, a brand new Patreon exclusive show, one where Len, veteran Imagineer Jim Schul, and I walk around the Magic Kingdom in Florida and check out all the new stuff that's debuted at that theme park over the past 2 years. That show should be posted on Sunday, December 28th. And just yesterday, we recorded some new episodes of The Case 4 with Chris Cox. And those will be popping on JHM shortly. And let's see, as we run for the curtain here, I want to thank Eric Hersey and David Gray again for the great job they do when it comes to the editing and physical production of this podcast. Also have a quick favor to ask of you folks. If you could head on over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review, well, not just this show, but also Light the Fuse. Should probably mention social media as we head out the door here. Mr. Taylor. You can find Drew Tailored, like a tailored shirt, and I want to say he's on X and Mammoth and Blue Sky. As for me, you can find me on X and Instagram as Jim Hill Media, and then over on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News. And that's going to do it for this week's show. So on behalf of Mr. Taylor, thanks for listening to this week's Fine Tuning, and we, the two of us, Drew and I, will be back soon.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here, wishing you a very happy half-off holiday, because right now Mint Mobile is offering you the gift of 50% off unlimited. To be clear, that's half price, not half the service. And Mint is still premium unlimited wireless for a great price. So that means a half day, yeah? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.